Yeah, and so should we show them kind of the process? So the general process, we get the fun job, right? I get to travel all over Montana. And we use bucket traps. So we just set out light traps, right? And the moths come in and they get caught in the buckets, and then we sort them. And then what we do is we make what we call moth lasagnas. And so these are just like something you'd put like, your lasagna in to put in the freezer, right? And so what we do is then I don't know if you can open that up, Chuck. So then we layer the moths in these things. And so there's a layer of cotton, and then we put a layer of moths. And then we put some tissue and a layer of cotton, and we put more moths here.
And a very important label.
And then we always make sure we put a really descriptive label here for them. And so we'll layer 4 or 5 moths in here, and then we keep them frozen and we ship them to the museum. And then from there, they go here. Here's how they're spread. So here's one of the spreading boards. So the volunteers and the students pull them out, and then they spread them on these boards like this. There's some, these are kind of some more hawk moths and things. And so once they get spread in that, they get put over here, which is this little drying thing here. So this is just a rack with a little heat lamp there. And then you put the boards, the spread moths in there, and they dry for what, 4 or 5 days?
Yeah, a couple days.
A couple days. And then after that, they these labels like here get turned into these little itsy bitsy labels down here. And then once they come off the boards, they get labeled with the site that they were collected from. And then they kind of get sorted like this. And a lot of these are just mixed species now that then have to be taken and then put into the cabinets with those inserts. These are called kitten moths. These little white ones here, they're kind of pretty. And then from there, they go into drawers, which this is what Chuck and I have been working on. We just condensed. We got about 15 drawers sorted and put names on them. So then the databasers can. And so once they get spread, labeled, they get put into drawers like this, kind of like mixed. And so this is just a bunch of moths that are just all different species that are mixed up. And then what we have to do is we have to go through all these drawers, and we sort them into each species, right? And we give them a name, like down here for the databasers, and then they all get databased. And then they all eventually go into their proper taxonomic place in those cabinets over there. So it's quite the process. And so all these drawers right here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, are all full like that of unsorted moths that we still have to sort.
We have found that it takes 16 hours to properly handle every 100 specimens that we receive. So it takes an hour to spread a board of those moths. It'll take another 30 minutes or so to take them off the boards. It'll take some time to identify them. It takes some time to label them. It takes some time to database them. We image them with a fancy camera system. We have to figure out where they're going to go. And so 16 hours is what it takes to handle every 100. And since we have done 35,000, you can do the math. It's a bunch of time.
It's a bunch of time. And what, Chuck, we found and so this is just what we call the macro moths, quote unquote. And it micro and macro moths is sort of I don't know, it's kind of a vernacular thing, but in theory, it's these bigger moths are sort of like evolutionarily more evolved, so to speak. And so they're called the macro moths. And we've documented about 1,300, about 1,400 of the macro moths in Montana. And the general rule of thumb is that if you have 1,300 species of macro moths, you're probably going to have at least twice, maybe two, three times as many of the micro moths. And so I'll just show you, here's a bunch of little micro moths that I brought down that I had spread. And so these things are, some of them are about a quarter of an inch. Some of them are even smaller. And so we're pretty confident that by the time, and the micro moths are harder to identify. A lot of times they need to be dissected or whatever, but we suspect that by the time we get done with this project, we'll have documented somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 species of moths in Montana.
And previously, we had a list of about 125 species that were in Montana. So we've upped the count a lot. And all the records we have are public, and so we have a website that everyone uses, and they can access what we have and what everybody else has. So we use that a lot, but it's a public website. It's called ecdysis.org.
Yep.
Not sure, but
It's called Ecdysis. So you guys, it's ECDSIS.org. And you can get on there and search, and then you can find CP Gillette Museum. And then what you can do is there you go. Oh, it's an I instead of an O. So you were right, ecdysis, but it's SIS, not SOS. Yep, there you go. Yep. And so you can, once you get on there, you can do a classic search, and it'll bring up like all the collections. It's a platform for all these entomological collections to database their stuff. And you can just, unselect them all and then scroll down, find CP Gillette Museum, hit search, and then you can search for like moths and then put in Montana or Lepidoptera in Montana, and it'll bring up all the records that they have here at the museum that are databased. And so you could actually search even by county. So if you wanted to know what we found in Gallatin County, you could, put in Lepidoptera, Montana, Gallatin County, and it would bring up whatever we've databased so far.
At the bottom of that screen, that search screen, once you put Montana in, go down to the bottom, and you can do just the images.
Yep.
And so it'll just show you all the ones we've taken, the 6,700 pictures of the Montana moth.
Yeah, and really high quality pictures of these. You can almost like zoom in on an individual scale if you want to. And so so that's this is where the moth project happens. And then I'll just, one last thing here, we'll just kind of show you, here's just a couple offices that are in the annex here that we use to, so all of these drawers here have all been sorted now into species. And so now they're ready for the databasers to take them in database. And once they get database, then they'll get put into the collection. And so I don't know, are you guys, you want to open it up for questions now?
Yeah, we'd love to.
Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to flip my screen here.
I'll just say while he's trying to figure that out, no, don't have to put it on me. But I speak to a lot of 4-H groups here in Colorado, and I encourage them to continue doing their work, collecting and studying insects. Moths are a great pollinator, and everyone loves bees at this time, but moths probably do more pollination because they collect where everything else, butterflies, bees, kind of hide someplace when it gets cloudy or at night. But it's important to have the moth studies. But the 4-H collections, I want to let them know that at the end of
There we are.
Oh yeah,
Hi guys.
at the end, they've always got a good place to go with that collection when it's maybe not fashionable to do collecting. So if you start a collection and you get bored with it, there's always a place that those specimens will be housed and be useful, as long as they're labeled who caught it, where they caught it, and when. is very important to have those on the labels. So
Mhm.
collection like this is important for those reasons.
Can you guys still hear us?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, so we'll take any questions you have.
Um, so like when you're studying moths, like do you guys study wildlife biology or what were your like majors or college degree?
Hmm.
Interesting.
Well, so my college education was entomology, but raising a family, I needed a job, and so I went into managing department stores and retail for 34 years. But I stayed with learning insects, and I was able to describe new species of moths, and stayed in contact with a lot of colleges. I visited the Montana State collection, and the one in Missoula, and all the ones in the West. Over the years, on my vacations, we'd come up and vacation. I would study with the schools, staying in touch with them, and so my education is a long learning. But then they hired me about 9 years ago to come up here and work with students, since I'd kind of volunteered up here for a number of years.
Mhm.
And then he's different.
I was a little different. So I got my degree in wildlife biology, but I actually studied owls for, oh gosh, until about 2012, 2013. And it was kind of just this circuitous route that I took. It turned out that one of the owls I was studying ate a lot of moths, and then I got involved with a group that was trying to figure out what these other nocturnal birds were eating, and so we got into this thing called barcoding, and uh, we turned up a bunch of moths, and I met Chuck, and we both realized this need for um, moth research in Montana, and we just I formed a little nonprofit, and this is kind of our flagship program, and so I think the point is, and interestingly enough, one of our good friends, Lars Crabo, he's a radiologist, and he's described what like 70
Oh yeah.
70 species of moths, and he just kind of like Chuck, he just had a passion for it, and he just kind of taught himself and met folks in the field and things like that, and so I think the moral of the story is you don't really I'm not sure you necessarily need a formal education to contribute to insect science. I like Chuck mentioned earlier, most of that stuff in the collection has come from what quote unquote amateurs, but really like they're guys like Chuck, because he doesn't have a degree, maybe and all this, they call him an amateur, but really he's an expert.
So
Uh,
we used to be called paraprofessionals, not quite degreed, but a lifetime of learning, and so you can take that into anything that you get into.
yep.
Uh, I started collecting butterflies in junior high school, and so that was 50 years ago, and still going strong.
Right.
So
Right. And I think if I mean, I think the benefit of going into like an entomology program or a school is certainly you have, I mean, they'll, like grad students here, they have the resources and the lab and things like that you don't have to like build yourself or whatever. But if you have a passion to do it, there's plenty of folks, I mean, that are willing to help.
I've got
You,
two high school students that do volunteer here. And so that will get them, they're interested in coming here later. And so my volunteers, even though it's maybe just a free volunteer job, that they spend 2 or 3 hours a week in the museum, if I'm looking to hire people, and I hire a lot of people, I'll be looking at those volunteers that have done a good job and are reliable. And they'll get a job with me. Fort Collins is the home of a national park office and a USDA office, and so you've got those resources there in Bozeman also. That different government agencies that are always looking for good help,
yep.
and so the jobs are out there. Not usually collecting insects, but sometimes you have to have the job to make a living and uh, and, uh, and give you the resources to do what you like to do.
Yep. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but the Bozeman actually has, MSU actually has an entomology program. And there actually is a Montana entomological collection housed at Bozeman. It's, each collection kind of runs things a little bit differently, but I would suggest if you guys are interested, reach out to like the extension service there. I mean, they're the state extension services in Bozeman. They do a lot of bug work, and then see if they know anybody at the Montana Entomological Collection, that is they've like I said, they have an entomology program. They have grad students doing work and things like that, and so you may be able to find.
A volunteer job, if nothing
Yeah,
else.
yeah, you might be able to follow, or just talk to them about what their route was and what they need and things like
Start
that.
with a tour and then
Yeah.
tell them you're interested.
Yep, yep.
What
So,
else?
Thank
And
you.
yes, he is that
I
much
know I
taller than
had a
me.
question. Can
See,
everybody hear me?
yes.
Cool. So I was just wondering, I know you talked briefly about how moths were like pollinators, but are they also like bioindicator species too, or does it like kind of
yeah.
affect the
So
health of
they
this
the
ecosystem?
more insects you have on your property, the healthier it is. And so when we're doing studies and we find a property that has hundreds of species, you can kind of say that that is a healthy environment. Uh, Insects are indicators because they feed on plants, and if the plants aren't there, or some barren wheat field or canola field is not going to have as many plants as a rich sagebrush flat or a hillside of wildflowers. So
Yep.
it's a good indicator for these ranches to have some wild space on them, and not all in agriculture.
Yeah. And moths in particular, like Chuck mentioned, I mean, their whole life cycle is connected to plants. And so they lay their eggs on plants, the caterpillars eat the plants, a lot of times the adults will nectar on plants. And that's kind of the number one thing. And number two thing is they're pollinators, right? Because they nectar on plants, but they're also important food for a whole bunch of things, bats and 16 out of the 20 major bird families rely to a significant extent on caterpillars to feed their young during the breeding season. And so, for like those three reasons, and then the fact that, although some people would argue this, that their taxonomy is like pretty well studied. So, like most moths, we can kind of like put a name on pretty easily. Um, and the fact that it's relatively easy to sample them, right? So you just go put a bucket trap with a light out. And so the fact that they're herbivores, they're linked to plants, they're prey, they're pollinators, that we can identify them and easily sample them, make them great indicators of environmental status for sure.
And they're sheer
Cool.
numbers.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the other thing. Yeah. Yeah. So they outnumber, there's what, like 165,000 Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths in the world, and currently described. And out of those, 140,000 of them are moths. And so moths outnumber butterflies 9 to 1. And worldwide, there's about 25,000 bees or something. And so moths outnumber bees almost 9 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of these things out there on the landscape, pollinating and providing food and things. And so that's a really key point too.
I just have one more question too. Can you go a little bit more in depth on the difference between the macro and the micro species? And like, is there like a threshold, and is it just the difference in size? Or you talked a bit about the evolution as well, and I was just kind of curious about how that differs.
It's judged on mouth parts and sexual organs, and so some of the micros are large, 2 or 3 inches across, but their copulatory organs and their mouth sucking parts are not as advanced as some of the other groups. So moths and butterflies are considered the most advanced insects. Flies are the top of the chain on the diversity, and then comes the moths and butterflies. But some of it's size, but mainly it's the wing structures. There's the most primitive moths don't have this little hook on their wing to pull up the hind wing when it flies, and so it looks like four wings going different ways, and they just kind of flutter around, and so that's at the bottom of the list, and then some of the other groups are more advanced. So most of it's size, but there are some small ones that are called, they're still macro moths, but it's mainly a large and small. But there's a lot of exceptions both ways.
There is. And there's sort of like, so everything from like plurality, which is like a moth family, and lower on the taxonomic tree are considered kind of the primitive micro moths. I mean, you can go that way too. And then everything above plurality are the macro moths. It's interesting about the evolution. So Chuck, he did a lot of butterflies too. And so for years, there was this whole thing that the moth people said, oh, well, no, butterflies are just day flying moths. And the butterfly people said, no, butter or moths are just day flying or nighttime flying butterflies. Well, there's a fella in Florida at the McGuire Museum that did a massive phylogenetic study on Lepidoptera. He sequenced the DNA of like 26,000 species or something. Oh, and what he basically found is that he confirmed that some of the oldest fossils we have are about 200 million years old for moths. And what his phylogenetic study showed is that yes, moths are older than butterflies, and butterflies diverged from moths about 110 million years ago. And so he kind of settled the argument. Yeah, well, butterflies are just day flying moths. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And so these moths were around when the dinosaurs were walking around, presumably, some of the earliest ones. Any more questions?
I have a question about the like day flying moths.
Mhm.
Like, how are those different, presumably aside from the fact that they make cocoons, how are those different than butterflies?
Uh, the antennas are different. All butterflies have a knob on the end of their antenna, so you can tell the difference between moth and butterfly. But there are some diurnal moths. Um, their eyes are reduced, and so they don't have the larger eyes to be able to see at night, and so they don't come to the lights, and so we have to find them on the flowers, and that's a kind of a nicer thing anyway. You see the relationship of those, but moths either have just a kind of a wiry antenna, or they're kind of fringed, or have got little fluttery things on the sides of them. But butterflies have knobs on them on the ends of their antenna.
Mhm.
Are there any like really big misconceptions about moths that like people have? And like if so, how do you guys deal with that?
So we have you may have heard the term Miller moths. Do you have that term up there? Millers. So we have a moth that invades the area in May. That its job is to hatch out in Kansas and Nebraska, and fly across the plains, and then they go up into the mountains here and in Montana, and feed the bears and the pikas and the marmots and everything else up there, and birds. But we interrupt that flight with 30-mile wide stretch of towns and lights from Cheyenne to Albuquerque, and they stop in the city, and then they're in the house, and people swat them, and they cuss them, and don't like them, and then it lasts about 2 weeks, and then they fly up into the mountains and do their thing up there. Then they come back, and they migrate back in the fall with a lesser group, but they see that anything that flies like that is a miller to them, even though that it's pretty much just one species that does that. And the way that you get rid of them is to seal up your doors, turn off all your lights, and never open your windows. Other than that, you just have to live with them for a couple of weeks, swat them if you need to,
Right.
and their job is to go up in the mountains, and we just interrupt their flight. But yeah, misconception, they think everything's an ugly moth, and then when you show them a colorful moth, they think, oh, that's a butterfly. And so we kind of show them the difference between the butterflies and moths.
Yeah. and just the ecological importance of them too. You just try to educate people on, like Chuck said, like these Miller moths, they go and feed a lot of grizzly bears.
They do.
Because they go up into the talus slopes and things, and so you just try to tell people, hey, yeah, they're kind of brown and ugly, but they have an important ecological function.
Well, I just had a question on, I know you went into a bit of detail on collecting the moss with like the light trap or the bucket trap and the lights. Is that something you can make at home, or like how do you get started in collecting?
You can start by putting a light, just leave the light on outside and see what's out there. Black lights that people used to use for posters really draws light insects a lot. And so even putting one of those out in your window will show what comes from your yard and the nearby trees come. So that's a good way to notice it originally. But I use a cheap bucket and a funnel, and the funnel can be out of paper or plastic, and then they put a light over it, and then everything comes to that light and then drops down the bucket, and then you can either view what's in there or you can do a killing agent in there, and it kills everything inside. Then you want to do something with it responsibly, either collect it or send it to somebody. But a good way to do it is to put a light over a funnel into a bucket, and you can see what's in there, then release them the next day or later in the night.
Yeah, and you can Google. I mean, there's a lot of resources out there on how to build one. It's mainly just the black light is the important thing.
Yep. Any light will do. If you're out in the wilderness and you're the only 15-watt bulb out there, they're going to come to that. So there's just some have a wavelength that's better than others to come to.
And is there a reason why they do like light and they kind of like go for it, I guess?
That's a good question. There's been studies a lot lately, and some say that they just interrupt their regular flight across the field, and they bump into your light and then fall into whatever you're doing. I've seen too many things come to my lights that it doesn't seem like it's an interruption in their flight. Um, um, a bright light will usually pull them maybe from 50 feet or maybe 75 feet away. And then everything outside that, they don't see the light. But brighter lights shine maybe further away. Um, but the latest study is that we're just interrupting their flight flying through with this trap.
Yeah, kind of like overloading their navigation system. Yep. It's so if any of you want to go into entomology, that's one of science's great unanswered questions.
Right.
Is it disorientation or is it actually attraction? We don't know.
We try to collect on new moons where the moon is not competing with the light that you're trying to shine, and so some people do not collect on full moons. Some collect better on the waxing moon or the waning moon. It's all they feed on plants, and so if they hatch out when the plant's out, they're going to be there anyway. So I don't know if it really matters when you put your trap out.
No. We all good?
We want to thank you for doing this. This has been great.
I'm so happy. This is the cool thing.
Do you guys have any Western sheep moth in your collection?
Yes, we do.
Not very many.
Not very many, but we have a few.
They fly pretty fast.
Yep, and they're day flyers.
Yes.
Yep. So yep. And they seem to like be there one year and not the next. And but we have a few. Well, the diurnal moths, we haven't done a great job of documenting those yet.
We're usually driving to the next place.
Exactly.
Do you have an experience with the Western sheep moth?
They're my favorite moth, and
Nice.
so
Well, we would always entertain getting records of those when they're flying. Sometimes we have a hard time either locating a place that they might be or the timing. Sometimes it's the 1st of August, around the first week of August, that we notice, at least down here in Colorado, that they fly.
Mhm.
But even just a correspondence on, hey, they're flying, or I saw one today. That's great because it is a favorite moth too. They're
Yeah.
Can we go show them this art?
Yeah. And if any of you guys want to, please reach out. I think Mabel or it has my email. Please reach out, and I encourage you guys if you're
Let's go.
okay. Here,
Oh.
I'm just gonna shut down my computer real quick, Chuck.
Come on, we can come back.
Oh yeah, okay. Sorry. So
Here's one buck moth.
can you see that? That's one of these Hemiluca, which is the same genus as. That's just a painting, but please reach out, and I encourage you guys if you're taking pictures, like Chuck said, we actually have. If you use iNaturalist, we have a you can search for the Montana Moth project on that, and any pictures that you take, please submit them to that project, and we try to get on there, and Chuck or I will give you give you a hey, yeah, that's what we think it is, or not. Here's I'm gonna flip my screen again. So here's some of these Hemiluca moths that are related to the western sheep moth. These are just paintings, but these are like sagebrush kind of things.
We have an artist that does these pen and pencil.
Wow.
Pretty amazing, huh?
There's another species.
There's another one.
Yeah.
Aren't they great? So
They're available in gift cards.
Interesting. A guy did a study on these. That there's a certain spider that mimics the pheromones of the sheep moths, and it draws the moths into its spider web because it lets off the pheromones. Isn't that pretty wild? But yes, please. So thank you guys for joining us, and I hope it was worthwhile. Do I still have you?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, no.
Wow. I wish we could like teleport there because it looks so cool.
Well, if you're ever down in the area, like Chuck said, it's available, and just stop on in, and if you if Mabel or you got my email, please share it, and I can forward you Chuck's email, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions, identify moths for you. If any of you guys are interested in getting involved with the moth project and actually doing some field collecting for us and things, we have spare traps and things, and I'd be more than happy to loan you a trap and get you trained on the protocols and everything like that. So just please reach out.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you guys.
Thank you so
Thank you so much.
You bet. Well, hey, I hope to hear from you.
Sounds good.
Yes.
Okay. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.